All right, Kiss Army, welcome to the KissFAQ podcast. Thank you for giving us your time today and letting us into your head. I hope we don't do any damage. We're just a bunch of Kiss fans and we talk Kiss. So come along for the ride. You've got nothing to lose. All right, welcome to the KissFAQ podcast. I'm your host, Julian Gill. Today we've got Marcus Almighty sliding in right as the bell rings. Voice of Reason Ken as well. Lonnie, you want to know what Lonnie's doing? That's what Lonnie's doing right now. Lonnie's at the Indianapolis Kiss Expo, or should we call it the Indianapolis Paul Stanley Expo, where there were a whole bunch of things on offer there, and I've got no idea what they were because I don't think there was a schedule posted yet for any of the stuff going on. What else is going on? Well, this week's Ace World episode was Stranger in a Strange Land, a demo, one that I always like because it's kind of a weird, heavy tune with a ton of vibe. Originally, I'd recorded a whole bunch of these in February, and we were starting to run out, so I decided to finish off the last two, so there'll be two more of those at the tail end of when that feature runs out, and I've got no idea when it runs out. I know all of April is covered on those weekly ones, so thank you for consuming those if you've been checking them out. What else in the Kiss realm? Mark, you got anything you need to talk about with your record? You always have something going on.
Well, it's going actually really good. I put up some art pieces that I was putting as part of the pre-order. Those are all sold out. All the test pressings are sold out. All my CDs are sold out, believe it or not, of this album. And now it's getting past half of the amount available of records sold. So I'm on the latter end of the albums available. So if you don't have your copy yet, then you should get your order in because it looks like they're going to go pretty quickly. Maybe usually it takes me a couple of months to sell off all the records, but it might be a bit quicker than that this time. So if you don't have a copy, grab one. I'm signing them all this weekend right now. I just started doing all the signing and stuff like that, and putting the posters in. And then after that, it's just a matter of them putting everything together and shrink wrapping it, and it's all done. Very cool. And I did something this week. I got the proof copy in. I decided to do the KDP version hardback cover of Mask Hysteria since I'd only done this very limitedly. And I was so pleased with how the whole thing came together on Amazon's hardback. So it's got a new little logo on the background since I've gotten rid of that gradient one. So if you're interested in a hardback of Mask Hysteria, that's the only version available now. Nice. And again, it's only limited edition. It's not a permanent fixture in the catalog. None of the books are. All right, we're going to be talking about 1978, the album of the year. In that year in history, 5 Kiss albums were released. Well, the Kiss albums, Gene, Ace, Peter, Paul, and of course Double Platinum, the compilation. Now it's a bit of a cheat to put Double Platinum up against anything, but I know I experienced that as an album in its own right early on in my history, or my history, simply because that had more songs on it and it was good bang for the buck. So I wouldn't doubt that it wasn't a similar situation in 1978, even though I can't speak to Kiss in 1978 in any possible way because I was not a fan. I wasn't even in America. But let's back to 19. Really? Because that came out in 79 in most markets. Australia, Germany, Bellefonds was November 79. So let's be absolutely clear on that. Did that come out in Argentina in 78? I don't know. I don't have that. I was never able to get that. What about the beautiful French Vogue copy? Yeah. So potentially that's November 79. Look at the back of the Sure Know Something, at least in Germany. So again, different markets, different cases. But whatever, we're not talking about that compilation. We're going to talk about the solo albums individually against the world. Ken, take us back to 1978. Who was Ken in 1978, and what was Ken doing, and what was Ken listening to?
Oh, God.
Well, meeting yourself.
Yeah. I was listening to a lot of different stuff because just the year before I started, getting into Kiss the year before, and so I was still building that fandom or whatever you want to call it. So I was still listening to, which I listened to forever. All kinds of different stuff like Steve Miller Band, Linda Ronstadt. Yeah, I had uh, all kinds of music. Alice Cooper. It just goes on and on. So, but I was starting to get into more heavier. Rush was another one, of course, at that time too. So yeah, I was listening to a lot of different things. So uh, there's a lot of good music back in the '70s too. There's a lot to choose from. Uh, so I don't know. I think when I bought the albums again, I bought them two 1 week when the solo albums came out. Gene and Paul first, and then the went back like a week or two later because I had some more money and went and got Ace and Peters. So and those were in heavy rotation when those came out. So I really enjoyed them. I mean, some more than others, especially at the time, but now I like them all a lot right now.
Mark, being of a similar age to me, what was Marcus Almighty doing in 1978? And were you aware of music? And what was your deal way back then?
Well, I would have been all of the mighty 5 years old then. Yeah, 78. Yeah. So I wouldn't have known much about anything at that time musically. My sister, who's 7 years older than me, she was the one who was, getting into music then, and whatever she was listening to, I would hear in the house. But I hadn't really started clinging on to music at that point yet. That was still a few years to come when that happened. So I don't have much input on this part of the conversation because I was too young for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to me. I was a little lad in West Yorkshire. What do I remember about pop culture? I remember Rasputin, Boney M. What do I remember musically? Osmonds, ELO,
Oh, the Osmonds.
Meatloaf, all that sort of thing. And it was all secondhand music to me at that point. I had no musical perspective of my own at that time other than the music that was around the house. And that was primarily classical music. And of course, I have spoken about that my parents having, Rubber Soul, Sgt. Pepper's Magical Mystery Tour, Shaved Fish, Imagine, as the cassettes that I kind of latched onto musically. So in terms of pop culture, and I don't know how deep penetration Kiss had into West Yorkshire, Shipley, and whatnot at that time. But that was the year everything changed for me. When we moved to America. So my memories of that are more tied into early 1979. None of these albums meant a thing to me at the time that they came out. Didn't know any of these artists. Had no reference for them. They weren't the sort of thing my aunt listened to. So again, she was the kind of pop music that we discovered when we went to my grandmother's house because she was quite a bit younger than my father. So I have a lot to thank her for an education in music. Unfortunately, her tastes did finally move out of the Osmonds. Not that there's anything wrong with Crazy Horses. I still like some Osmonds.
One Bad Apple.
Yeah, come on. There's some really cool stuff in all music. So I'm not tied to it. But if you look at the British top 10 for 1978, I wouldn't have heard popular radio because why would my parents be tuning into it? They were the children of the Beatles, and my father was trad jazz. So zero interest in what Donna Summer had to say. So all of this is discoveries that came later on. So Mark, narrowing down your list, you seem to like 1978 as an option. What were some of the albums and artists that did not make your top 5 today? Who are the ones that just fell short of making your list when you had to really categorize the ones that you want to present today?
Well, there were quite a few. I mean, when I did some more research into it more deeply, I realized that there was probably not as many good things that as I kind of thought I remembered. But I mean, there was stuff like Blondie that didn't make
Mhm.
my thing. I was never an Elvis Costello guy, so that never made my list
Mm.
either. You know, uh, and being a huge Genesis guy, and then there was 3 was out, but that to me was never really high on my Genesis, you know, rankings. So those ones were kind of put out of the equation. And then and funny enough, another one that I was thinking about, and I've always said the way I kind of rank records, because I just actually did a ranking for the Yes podcast just recently, and I've said the same thing, is that for me, ranking is based on listening. If I pull out this record and
Yeah.
listen to it a lot, then it's going to be ranked high. Even if
Yeah.
I don't go by this kind of thing where people say this is a great record, but it might be a great record, but if I don't listen to it, it won't rank high for me, right?
Hmm.
So one of the records that's a prime example of that is I love Rainbow, and Long Live Rock and Roll came out, but I don't listen to that record much at all. I listen to Rising. That's my go-to for Rainbow. So that didn't make my list either, right? So that's basically how I kind of categorize it. So those are right there. Those are a bunch of records that, under maybe normal circumstances, I would mention, but I don't think I would rank them high in that year.
Yeah, it gets tough. It really has to be what comes out of the holster the most, because we listen to a lot of albums, and we may listen to them, all the way through from a particular year. But unless they're in regular rotation in our personal pop culture library, then they're really not going to be, standing up against Kiss albums, which are so central to a Kiss FAQ podcast. Ken, I'm very curious for you, the albums that did not make your top 5 today.
Yeah, there's a lot of artists I was listening to. I was buying a lot of, I think I was buying a good amount of records back then, or else I was getting them also like for Christmas. I put them on my list and get them that way. But some of that did not make the list. Are, for instance, Boston, Don't Look Back, that album. I really enjoy that album. That's, almost as good as the first one, I would say. And I played that a lot. Foreigner, Double Vision. And there was another solid one I had and listened to a lot. Alice Cooper, From the Inside. I played the heck out of that one too. And that was going in my top 5. And, it was close, but it just barely didn't make it in there. I also listened to Barry Manilow, Even Now. I love that album. I played that a ton. Just a bunch of great songs on that one. The Sweet, Level Headed, which is not one of the Sweet's most popular, but I love that album. That's like my maybe favorite Sweet album, and I played it a lot. I still play it today. And then there's Queen, Jazz. I had that one with the poster that came out. I was like, what the heck? These girls on bikes, they have nothing on their tops. But anyway,
Who are?
yeah, I think I hung it up on my wall for a little bit. My mom didn't seem to mind too much, but and then those were, and there were some others, but those were the ones that were close to making that top 5. I was listening to all those albums.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see if any of these Kiss albums make any of our top 5s today, because again, it's such an abundance of Kiss material in that year. I can't imagine what it would have been like to be a Kiss fan in 1978 and suddenly have 4 Kiss albums, 4 starkly different Kiss albums and different sounding Kiss albums to kind of ingest with all the other, music that was going on in that year. So for me, some of the ones that don't make the list, I listened to Foghat, Stone Blue a ton back in the day when I was getting into hard rock and boogie rock, and that was one that my sister listened to, and that was just catchy as hell. Didn't quite make the list because it just hasn't been played again. Same with the Rolling Stones, Some Girls. Love the album.
Yeah.
But it just kept getting bumped off the list. Actually, it didn't just keep getting bumped off. I was very adamant in my top 5 right from the moment we decided to do this episode. I knew exactly what the 5 albums are going to be. Nothing's changed. I have really no order. Equinox, Jean-Michel Jarre. I absolutely adore his early albums up through Rendezvous, and that's really the listening. But I listen to it a lot, but I listen to Rendezvous and Oxygen far more. And then finally, Quiet Riot 2. I've spun the living daylights out of that album since finding it in Penny Lane Records in Liverpool in 1987. It was actually a bootleg. Didn't know that at the time. And I sold it as soon as I came back to the States for a good sum of money to someone who also didn't know that was a bootleg. But I really like those Quiet Riot albums and listen to them continuously. That's the only one. I mean, there are others, Angel, Sinful, but that's more because of the ad. That was in Circus Magazine, so it gets really tough. All right, let's get going. Your first pick. You can go in order if you have an order. Let us know if this is part of your order, and if, like me, you're going unordered because everything's a tie. Ken's finally.
Yes, everything's a tie.
Everything's a tie. We're all winners.
I'm not wearing one though, but
yeah. All right, Mark. Why don't you get us started with your first pick of 1978?
All right, so I do have a ranking. I don't believe in ties. I mean, I understand why you guys do it, but this whole tie thing is not good.
Everybody wins.
You gotta. Come on, man. There has to be a winner. There's always a winner and a loser. There's no such thing as ties.
So you're saying having a tie is being an intellectual coward?
Yes, pretty much. But I would never say that to you, Julian. You're a smart man. I'll never put
winners
that
and
to you.
losers, but that ain't no big deal. Anyway,
it does. But I'm going to start with my number 5. This is a band that I got into kind of late in the game, but when I did get into it and when it finally clicked with me, I've been going like head first, dive into the pool head first and been listening to them. But I kind of start in the early 70s with them. Anything prior to it, I'm not really too hip on it. And this record really connected with me really well. And you mentioned it earlier, Julian, is Some Girls, Rolling Stones.
Uh-huh.
This album, I think, is fantastic. I mean, and it's probably the only record I'm going to show today that I have only on CD and not on vinyl, because I've been hunting down the original one, with the illegal faces, So I've come close. I've come close with finding one, but one time it was incredibly pricey, so I didn't bother to get it. But anyways, great songs on here. Shattered. That's a classic, of course. Miss You, When the Whip Comes Down. When the Whip Comes Down is one of those songs I've always really loved from them. Imagination's great. Just like the whole record to me, I think is great. Beast of Burden. Yeah. It's a great thing. And again, this one, Sticky Fingers, and of late, mainly because the box set came out and I was really diving into it a lot. Black and Blue have been a lot of the ones I've been listening to quite frequently and getting into it quite a lot. So if it's going to be a repeated listen, it's going to be in my list. And this is definitely a high listen album for me.
Yeah, it's in my Rolling Stones playlist, because every Rolling Stones album's in my Rolling Stones playlist. Well, I've got it separated into everything before Steel Wheels, and then Steel Wheels onward. They're about to drop a new album. Should be a new single out today or tomorrow.
Yeah,
which
today.
Is very cool. Yeah, so that's a very nice pick. Ken, any thoughts on Some Girls by the Stones?
Yeah, it's a good one. I had that one. I bought that when it came out back then, and I do have that cover. You're talking about the one that has Lucille Ball, face, and I think Raquel Welch maybe, and a couple other ones. Anyway, that's a great album. That was a solid one I listened to in '78 for sure. So yeah, that one was close to making a list too.
So Mark's 4 other picks are going to be the solo albums. Wow, didn't see that coming. Ken, why don't you get us going with your first pick?
Okay, I will pick, I don't know, it's just a random, let's see here. Albums are stuck together.
Oh, boy.
Oh, Mark mentioned this one earlier when he was talking about some of his ones that he didn't that didn't make his list, and this was one that heavy rotation. Love this album.
Hmm.
Blondie, Parallel Lines. The whole thing is solid from beginning to end. Of course, everyone knows, yes, Heart of Glass and one way or another, but every song, all the other songs are fantastic. It's you just don't skip anything on it. It's solid. I remember my friend bringing it over. Is like, what's that? Blondie. Huh? Anyway, and listen to it.
Is Hanging on the
Great.
Telephone on that?
Yes, yes.
Damn, I love Def Leppard's version of that.
Yeah. Well, come on, yeah. Fade Away and Radiate, Pretty Baby, Sunday Girl. I mean, it's just the whole thing's good. I mean, you just can't miss what's going on. So that's a heavy rotation. That's one of my top 5 from Blondie. And then I remember I went into their back catalog and bought their earlier albums and whatnot. I do have that Blondie box set that came out like a couple of years ago. It has all their albums, but anyway, that's one of mine.
All right, so I'm pretty sure this album is going to be on at least one other person's list, so I might as well get it out of the way. And it is,
I think I know it. Go ahead.
Rush, Hemispheres.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely, potentially by far my favorite Rush album, period.
You're right. Yeah.
This is the one album that is just above and beyond everything. The spectacular La Via Strangiato, unbelievable. The first time I heard that in Cygnus X1, but for the humor in that rock and roll can have with the mighty trees is enough just to set it apart. When I listen to Rush, I'm more than likely going to reach for this album or Roll the Bones. Go figure. Because Roll the Bones was really, that was really my real entry point into buying a Rush album purposefully, rather than listening to the hits, rather than listening to parts of Signals or 2112. So Hemispheres, absolutely spectacular album. What more do I need to say? So Ken, you had it, obviously.
Yeah, I had it. I figured Mark would have it, but it's probably my favorite Rush album also. I like all the early Rush stuff. So, I mean, 2112 is up there, obviously, and even Farewell to Kings I love a lot. And Caress of Steel. I mean, the underrated Caress of Steel.
I love Caress of Steel.
I mean, it's all good. I mean, you can't miss anything with 70s, Rush. So, but that one, I like wore it out. I played it so much. I mean, I loved it. I mean, I got into Rush like the year before. When, like I said, I think I bought the Farewell to Kings, and then oh, I like that. I do like it. And then because I was looking for 2112 and it wasn't there, so I got Farewell to Kings, and then I got 2112, and then this one came out. I got Archives and all that kind of stuff. But this album is just so. I don't know. It's the the 20-minute story song on the first side, epic thing. It just keeps going. It's like it's rocking, and then it goes and switches to this and that, and I just loved it. So that was my first real progressive group that I got into.
Whereas I still don't recognize it as progressive. To me, it is just exquisite music. It doesn't need.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't
need
either
to be
back
put
then.
in a bucket. Even to this day. All right, Mark, elbows up. Was Hemispheres on your list?
Yeah, and since we're doing it this way, where since you guys are not really ranking it, I'll have to pull up mine here.
Stole Mark's thunder,
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah. There's no problem with that. I'll just let you know immediately that this was my number 1 pick for this list. Hemispheres easily is my number 1. Easily.
I figured it would be.
This is my Canadian first pressing of Hemispheres. If you're gonna buy a copy of this record, you go with the country of origin. This one sounds fantastic. I even have the red vinyl one, of course.
Yes, I had that one. Yeah.
Any true Rush fan would have that album.
Yeah.
I agree with Julian that rock and progressive rock can have humor in it. Rush are Canadians, and Canadians love humor, and they love humor in their music. This album, to me, is their exclamation point about their talent and their technique and their songwriting and their arranging, and showing that they can make quite possibly one of the greatest progressive rock albums of all time. But it was also the record that completely broke them in a lot of ways. It was the record that Geddy Lee has mentioned numerous times as one of the top 3 albums. Like, that was the worst recording experience of his life, is this one. Mainly because they wrote it all on acoustic guitars, and he didn't really think of the singing while they were doing it. They were just strumming along, like, yeah, I'll figure it out, blah, blah, and realized that they wrote everything in a very high key register for him, and he said it was a bitch to do. Terry Brown, even the producer of this record, had a hell of a time. They had to switch studios a couple times. They went from, I think it was Trident to Advision to finish it, because he just didn't like how it was sounding at the end. And it's still known within the audiophile circles, I used the little, quotations, that this is one of the albums that doesn't sound very good on vinyl, and did need an overdoing of the mastering of it. I don't know. I thought it was okay. It's I guess you can kind of compare it a little bit to sort of like the Hotter Than Hell. That's the kind of muddy record, but not really as muddy, nowhere near as muddy as that. But
just less separation.
But it's it's the record that after they were done they said enough of this, and they started making a little bit more shorter songs, more to the point, a la Permanent Waves. And then we were off to the races. Permanent Waves, Moving Pictures, Signals, all that stuff. Fantastic records. And for all you Rush fans out there, I don't know how many of you have picked up on this, but MoFi announced that they are releasing the entire Rush catalog on MoFi Super Vinyl, two time 45 RPMs. Some one-step versions of the albums are coming out. They'll be doing it between 2026 and 2028. But here's the interesting thing. The guy at the convention where I just heard this from in Chicago said that they are not doing, and this is so weird, but I know why. Crest of Steel they're not going to be doing, and they're not doing Exit Stage Left either. And I know why they're not doing Crest of Steel. The tapes are completely fucked. They're like those master tapes have been worn to death, and they're toast. So they're probably going to either need to find some sort of alternate tape somewhere, some re-EQ'd one or something if they're going to do that. But they don't want to do those sort of things. They want to have the original tapes. But Rush original tapes are really pooched. Back when they did those 3 sector releases, those sector box sets, even then they were saying that they had a lot of trouble getting decent transfers from those tapes. So MoFis are going to be digital. I'm telling you that right now. If you think there's going to be all analog cuts of this, you're dreaming, my friends. So that's enough of me rambling. Number 1 for me for 78 was Hemispheres.
All right, well, why don't you go straight into more rambling with another one of your picks, since we stole your number 1 pick.
Okay, so I'll do my number 4. Now, this might be a surprise to you guys, because, as you know, I tend in these sort of yearly things that we've done to avoid Kiss records, but I'm going to surprise you. My number 4 is Paul Stanley. I really, really love this record. I mean, ever since I first heard it, I first made the mistake of thinking, is this a Kiss record? Like, I honestly thought it was a Kiss album, because I didn't see the album cover. It was my friend who played it to me first. And I thought it was just like something, that I hadn't heard before from Kiss, because this was a long time ago when I first heard this. And when I figured out it was a solo record, I was intrigued. Of course, the one thing on here that kind of brings it down a little bit is Hold Me, Touch Me. I'd never really liked that. So I found it overly syrupy, right? But then people say, well, why don't you pick Ace then? I go, because it's always a toss-up between Ace and Paul, depending on the day. But I've never liked Wiped Out either. So to me, they both have a song that I don't like on either record. So depending on the day, it could have been Ace, but I love this record. I mean, everything on this record to me is just fantastic. And I love the whole story about side A being done with the one set of musicians and then side B doing with a bunch of other musicians too. I always thought that was fantastic and interesting little bit of information. I mean, songs like It's All Right and Goodbye and all those songs, they're all like everything on this record I find is fantastic. Tonight You Belong to Me, Ain't Quite Right, Wouldn't You Like to Know Me, Take Me Away Together is one I've always loved. That Carmine, being that he does only one song on this album, he did a great job on this. And I got this, of course, when I was in my crazy collecting phase. I had to find the Japanese ones with this obi on it and blah 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 blah. So I was definitely high on finding these copies, and yeah, I really like this album. This is just really, when I think of solo records and what I thought each one should do, this one was pretty much on the mark for me. He didn't disappoint me with his solo record.
Yeah, but kind of as mentioned in the comments, it is the most Kiss-like in many ways, with the exception of Hold Me, Touch Me. But even that, you can say, well, he was just trying to write a Beth, or he was in love, and love blinded him to good taste, because obviously it was a very personal and emotionally revealing song for him. Yeah, it's interesting where these Kiss albums line up on lists. Paul's is probably leader of the pack for making, my top 5 for 1978 in some ways. Ken, do you have Paul Stanley's solo album on your top 5?
Yeah, well, I didn't put it at the top 5, even though it's all the solo albums are the top for me, because they just are. They all are very important as albums, and I listen to those like crazy. So, but yeah, I love Paul's album. It's kind of, you can't kind of put them up against all these other kind of albums, even though it is the kind of music I like. Paul Stanley is pretty much Kiss music, period. So yeah, it's a good pick by Mark. Of course.
Yeah. I'm just not a musical slave to Kiss, and don't even try and be. That's why I like doing these early episodes, because it gives us an opportunity to talk about some of the other music.
They're automatic.
And it's going to be the same for much of the live audience or the audience afterwards. We're not all tied to Kiss. We all like other things as well. So why don't you give us another one of your picks?
Yeah. Okay. Here's another one. That's an artist I got into probably the year before. When I got the prior album to this one, but this one I played the heck out of too. This is Billy Joel.
Nice. Great pick.
52nd Street. I think I got this for Christmas, actually. I know I did. And this has, of course, My Love and a bunch of others, but there's songs like Stiletto and we have Zanzibar, just great songs on here that were not hits even. So just a solid album. I listened to it over and over and over. One of my favorite Billy Joel records. It's close to being the top one for me. But The Stranger, I got the year before that. That's how I got into him. Then I bought his older stuff too. But yeah, Billy Joel, couldn't go wrong. I played it over and over. Like Mark said, these are albums that he just played a lot. You always kept putting it on and listening to it because you liked it so much. So,
do you have the Attila album?
I don't. I looked for it a couple times, but I didn't pull the trigger to buy it. I've heard it on like YouTube. Yeah, interesting hard rock album.
All right, I'm going to go with my next pick. I'm just going to go straight up with what would likely be number one or tied for number one if I'd ranked that, since Mark's had to give up his number one pick. And it is Stained Class, Judas Priest,
yes,
which is by far my favorite Judas Priest album, period. Just like everything I said about Rush Hemispheres applies to Stained Class. Because how can you go wrong with that album cover, number one? But you've got all these studio versions of the stuff, basically, that makes Unleashed in the East what it is. Exciter, White Heat, Red Hot, Stained Class, Invader, Better By You, the cover, Saints in Hell, Beyond the Realms of Death. Are you kidding me? This album, pound for pound, doesn't have a single cut on it. Gene Simmons has talked about melting the fat off people in the audience. Well, Stained Class cuts it off you with a stiletto. It's where they really start finding their dual guitar attack and starting to really work those different techniques into how they work as a pair of guitarists. And Rob's operatic vocals, are just beyond solid. So Stained Class, I've talked about on other podcasts over the years, but it wasn't even my point of entry into Judas Priest. I didn't know anything really about Judas Priest, just like Kiss was an echo of something that I'd experienced years earlier. When we moved to America, we had friends who were also English, but they had an older brother and a lake house in the Finger Lakes. We went up there and we heard the brother playing music, and I had no idea what it was. And I spent years trying to figure out what that was. I never heard it again until Turbo came out. And I started digging into the back catalog of Judas Priest because, like Asylum, Turbo had caught my fancy sonically for whatever reason. So I start going back, and then I find out that song was actually on British Steel United. And I'd had no idea what it was. So that's my whole love affair with Judas Priest. And Def Leppard, Judas Priest, Kiss, those are kind of really central to me. Anyone else have Stained Class?
No, but I think it's great. Oh,
yes.
This was my number 3 record.
All right, sure. Why?
When I first heard this, I made the mistake of when I listened to this the first time. I had just finished listening to Master of Puppets. Then I put this on, and I was like, ugh, that guitar tone, because I compared to Hetfield's, I was like, what? It sounds, I was like, it didn't connect with me immediately when I heard it. But years later, I bought it again on CD and listened to it thoroughly. And I was in a bit more of a Priest mode at that point. I had gotten, British Steel and all these other records. And I was like, it really connected to me after that. I mean, Exciter was great. I thought Halford's singing was incredible on that. Like, it was like upper stratosphere singing at the end there. I was like, wow, this guy is like hitting the top of the range there. And, Beyond the Realms of Death, what a great song that is. I mean, this was the record that kind of made me get into the whole dual lead thing. I mean, Maiden was doing that for me too, but this was also a very good record to show some good interplay between dual guitar players. And I mean, Julian went through all the songs on here. I mean, they're just fantastic. And I remember one time I listened to this Metal Blade compilation, and Fate's Warning did a cover of Saints in Hell. And I was like, that was the time when they got back on my radar, because for a while I was really into the US power metal stuff. And when Fate's Warning were on that, I was like, what song is that? I go, that's familiar. And I realized it was Priest from this record. And then again, I pulled this record out again and fell in love with it. Overall, I think Stained Class is probably like my number 3 or 4 overall of this. I mean, everybody knows that my number 1 Priest album has been Painkiller, always has been, always will be. But this record is really, really good. And the drumming on this too, I think, is a little bit underlooked. I think that's not as appreciated as it should be. Fantastic drumming.
Yeah, that's Les Binks on drums, right? I think, yeah. So, I mean, I even rank that ahead of Sad Wings, and I can't wait to see what they do with the remix of that later this year.
They're doing a remix of that?
They're doing a remix of Sad Wings. They've got the multi-tracks.
Awesome.
So it's gonna get the treatment as they did with Rockarola a couple of years. Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of that because they processed the drums and it just didn't sound quite right. So it either works or it doesn't. The Aerosmith first album treatment's a good example of something, a reimagining of it, where it does work. Ken, did you have Stained Class on yours? I mean, I don't think you're going to go from Billy Joel to Sad Wings.
No, I wasn't. Yeah, and I wasn't playing it at that time. I think it's a great album. Obviously, not my favorite Judas Priest album, but I love that album too. I think it's good, but did not make my list. No.
So
I see why it made yours.
So I'll do my last one, which is my number 2, because my number 1 was Rush. So my number 2. Under normal circumstances, on anybody else's list, probably would be number 1. It is one of those records, I mentioned it before in a few podcasts, where it totally changed everything for me as a guitar player. Just incredible record. Van Halen 1. I mean, this record, I remember the first time I ever heard it was just fantastic. Like, I heard Eruption, some guy was blasting in his Z28 in the parking lot, and I was like, wow, what the hell is that? And then it went right into You Really Got Me. And then, like, I pretty much stuck in this parking lot with my bike just circling to listen to it because he was playing the whole thing in his car. And I just got the record, went out, searched out the tablature book for it when I was playing guitar already at this time, and just tried to learn and pick up as much stuff as I could off of this record. It changed everything about the guitar playing to me because it was just basically a 3-piece band with a singer, and to see what he did with effects and how he could, do these creative guitar solos with the tapping and whammy bar and all this stuff. This is all stuff that was just like, people have the whammy bars already before, and there was that, everybody says, Steve Hackett was the first guy to do tapping. Yeah, that's all great. It's true, but he popularized all this stuff, like totally popularized it until where everybody wanted to do it again. I mean, I don't know too many people who were saying they were playing, the giant hogweed too many times at their jams. They were playing Van Halen. And I love this record so much. I got a test pressing of this record as well. I have it in my collection. Sounds amazing. And this record, like I said, if Rush wasn't putting out a record in '78, this would be my number one selection.
Yeah, I mean, for who isn't it? My aunt sent us a cassette of that for Christmas. So she sent us a stack of cassettes from England of, albums that she thought we should check out, or maybe they were just, to give us. And this was one of them. And from that moment, Running with the Devil into Eruption. And then every single song on that album is a powerhouse. Forget the technique, forget the tone. I mean, I can sit here to this day, and I've been binge watching, what's his name? Shaker the Rops, the guy on YouTube who is probably one of the best technical Edward Van Halen players. Really works hard on tone and technique, though he doesn't 100% copy Edward, because who can really copy what is down to DNA? Only Wolfgang. So this whole album is seminal. This album is Are You Experienced? This album is just one of those albums that really, I think everyone's got an experience with VH1, Van Halen 1. And it's part of their story. Whether it's on their list is a whole different matter. Ken?
Yeah, it was one of my 5, obviously. I remember going on a road trip from Northern California down to LA area, whatever. I think we were going to UCLA or USC, which one? I can't remember, or something. And the other guy I was with, he went to school down there. But he put the album in. I hadn't even heard of Van Halen yet, and he said, "You got to listen to this." And he had it cranking in the car while we're going down. And I remember, wow, this is pretty good. And then it went into like Eruption, the second, like, oh, whoa, what the heck? I never heard anything like this. And then the whole thing, the rest of it was just headbanging, great, solid music. Something I had never heard before. So not long after that, I think I heard it again. Shortly after that, some party or something, and I was like, okay, I gotta go buy this record because it's so damn good. So I got it, and it's probably my favorite Van Halen record. Could be my favorite. Or it could be a tie, of course. But it's just a great album from beginning to end. I played it a million times.
Trouble by Whitesnake, great album. My first Whitesnake album, actually. So, all right, I'm going to go with one of my picks. Obviously, Van Halen 1 was on my list as well. I mean, I'm not a complete madman. But this would be the album that's tied for my number one pick for 1978, and it's AC/DC, Courage. And it is the European mix, because let's be absolutely clear on this. There are two completely different albums. The European mix is more raw. It's like the leather version of Too Fast for Love, or the French version of Breaking the Chains for Dokken. It is raw. It is ballsy. It is gritty. It is sleazy. It is dirty rock and roll with Cold Hearted Man on it as well. But when you think of the songs on this album, Rock and Roll Damnation, Down Payment Blues, Riff Raff, Sin City, Kicked in the Teeth, and possibly my favorite song on the album, What's Next to the Moon. There is just a undying plethora of awesome AC/DC songs on this one album, and it's got attitude, and it's got the Bon Scott swagger that really is at its height here. And I know it may sound trying to be edgelord by singing its praises when what comes next is Highway to Hell and obviously Back in Black, but this to me is the pinnacle. The Highway to Hell is the refinement of what is established with this blueprint here, pound for pound. Anyone else have AC/DC or thoughts on Powerage?
I don't have that one, but I think that's a solid pick. I knew you were going to pick it because I know you love that album. I think it's your favorite one, isn't it?
My favorite AC/DC album
overall, right?
I think it possibly is.
Yeah. But that's a solid pick. Not on my list, but you can't go wrong with AC/DC.
Yeah, I don't have it on my list, but I mean, it's a record that I'm very familiar with. I mean, I had a couple of friends that had AC/DC as their favorite band, so it was played often. My sister really loved that record too, so it was played a lot in the house a lot as well. And I mean, I love both eras of AC/DC. I think that they both have something to offer, and Bon Scott has that really bluesy, gritty style to him that is very cool. It's almost kind of like Deano and Dickinson. Each of them had their own kind of style and gave their different sort of approaches to the band, and I love both.
Yeah, Deano had a punk swagger. I mean, he was a street urchin. He completely different in character and style than Bruce. Bruce is a spectacular vocalist, incredible range, but a whole different posture, a whole different attitude, a whole different demeanor. Again, changing singers in a band is a very, very, very challenging thing, because that is almost a central dynamic right up there with guitarists. You can swap to a certain extent, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work. But a singer, you're taking the visual and the focal point out. Ken, you have one more pick, I believe.
I do have one more pick. It's not in any order, but it's just one of the 5 that I picked for 78. This is a band which I would say is probably was the leader of
Gene Simmons.
Yeah, I want to do that. I thought about doing that actually, because I played Gene Simmons album more than any other of the Kiss solo albums, to tell you the truth.
I've been waiting for you to work up to Gene Simmons as your number one pick for 1978.
It's just a given, so I have to show some other stuff, right? So I would call this band this album that's coming up here is kind of the leader of the new wave era of things, music. So it's the Cars'
great pick.
debut album. Man, that was on the all these songs. Most of the songs were on the radio from this. I don't know how many hits they had off of this. Probably 5 or more. Good Times Roll, My Best Friend's Girl, Just What I Needed, In Touch with Your World, Don't Just Stop, You're All I've Got Tonight, Bye Bye Love, Moving in Stereo, all mixed up. I mean, it's like a greatest hits album, really, to a degree. And that's how good it is. Just a great band, different sound, well produced, Roy Thomas Baker. And I played the heck out of this one. So this was the one that was close to not making my list. I was fiddling with, maybe Alice Cooper, From the Inside, versus, that was another one that I was gonna put on here too. But yeah, solid record. Love the band. They had all their early albums were great. So
let's check in on Lonnie. Take a quick break, and apparently Paul Stanley's on stage in Indianapolis. Thank you, Lonnie. So
nice.
Paul's there to relieve people of their wallets this weekend. He's got a very full.
Yes.
He's got an incredible signing schedule, and I think that speaks to the power of the KISS Army is still interested in what these guys are doing and the opportunities to meet, to greet, or to have things signed, or simply to be there and enjoy the KISS Army camaraderie. So. I'll be in Detroit in a couple of weeks, and look forward to participating in some of that good feeling. So I've got
awesome.
one pick left. And
Gene Simmons, right?
I really wanted to work KISS into this conversation today for 1978. I wanted either Ace or Paul were most likely going to be the ones to make a list and to compete with some of these other albums, but it's just not realistic. As much as I love KISS and they're a part of my life, these other albums are far more a part of my musical jukebox. So I don't have any KISS picks in my list, and I'm not ashamed of that fact. And we'll talk about why Ken's betrayed the oath today after I do my pick.
They're just, whatever.
But my final pick is also another album by Judas Priest, Killing Machine, the second album to come out that year.
Oh, okay.
It came out at the tail end of 1978, and it's got Delivering the Goods. It's got Rock Forever. It's got Evening Star. It's got potentially one of my all-time favorite Judas Priest songs, Hellbent for Leather. But it's also got Green Man Leashy and Before the Dawn.
Oh, yeah.
So Evil Fantasies and Killing Machine itself, the title. And I know this has various titles in different markets depending on where you are. But again, you have just packed a whole 10 pounds full of Judas Priest core catalog songs into
1 year,
into 1 year on 2 albums. And that's before you even get to British Steel. Yeah. So, British Steel is most likely going to be one of the albums that the majority of Priest fans put pretty high up on the top of their list, or perhaps Screaming for Vengeance, and for Mark, obviously Painkiller for a different era. But for me, everything stays very much in the 70s for going from Sad Wings to Sin After Sin to Stay in Class to Killing Machine, and then capping it off with Unleashed in the East. These albums, it's a whole different band in a sense. It's a band that, like Rush, is developing with each album with technique and skill and refining their craft. And that's why it's very easy for 2 Judas Priest albums to make this list for me rather than Paul Stanley or Ace or Peter or Gene. And all of those albums are important to me. Killing Machine, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love it too. I mean, all those songs that you mentioned, like Green Man Leashy and like especially that one, I thought that what really impressed me about that is that when I heard the original version of that, I liked the fact that they didn't keep it totally like the original. Like they added some Judas Priest flair to that, and I've always loved that song. And it's just such a simple dun 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 dun, dun, but it has so much power to it. And again, it wasn't too commonplace after a while to put out 2 studio albums in a single year. So whenever a band does that, it always has my attention and respect for that, because it's not easy, man. And recording 1 good album in a year, but to record 2 of them, you got to be on point, and you got to be confident in your writing and your recording, and just everything involved, the people who are involved in it, from the engineer to the producer to everybody. So great record.
Yeah, as is the one that David Donnelly's put into the chat. Rich Kids Ghosts of Princes and Towers. If you want, the Clash didn't come anywhere near my top 10, but this album would. It's Glenn Matlock's band with Steve New, Midge I think. Again, check it out on Spotify. Absolutely fantastic. Pop punk or post-punk pop. Again, pop was always a very important element to real punk. It had that catchy kind of vibe. All right, let's talk about why Kiss has not really entered the question today, Ken.
Well, for me, it's just a given. I mean, it's my favorite band, and they, they get a preference over any other music that I listen to just because they're Kiss in general. Though, I wouldn't put stuff like what do you want to call Monster up there with anything, for whatever year that is. But it's just I've listened to it so much time. It's just ingrained, the Kiss music. It's just a given that I love those albums, especially the 70s stuff, of course, so much that you can't really, rank them. I can't just put them on top of everything else, because there was a lot of other great music, obviously, that we've shown here that was put out that year or any year by other bands. Some classic albums. And let's face it, the solo albums weren't hit records on the radio. You got to be realistic of the music itself. That they didn't sell a lot, Basically,
they sell a lot. They sold a lot from the cutout bins
from the
198.
Yeah. From that standpoint, they were shipped a lot out. But the true Kiss fans bought them, I guess, at the time, for the most part. But I can't really, just throw them as number one all the time. It's just doesn't make sense. So, and I know you did a couple of Priest albums, so I know. I guess we're going to expect the Priest FAQ podcast coming next after this.
No, I've done episodes on Rock and or Roll with BJ Cramp, on Powerage, on I think on Stage
I know
as well.
Any bad time.
But when we do these yearly, kind of albums of the year versus Kiss releases, it's just impossible. But I mean, Mark's going to be picking the next year that for us to put in the can down the road for when we need an episode like this. But I think today my respect goes out to Mark for having Paul Stanley in his list. I listened to Paul's probably the most of the 4 solo albums, more than Ace's. Second, I probably listened to Gene's second most, and then Ace, and then Peters. Peters I didn't get for many years. Peters to this day remains an album that I love writing to. When I'm actually doing long form creative writing, I just it works really well in the background for me. Ace and Paul, I mean, they're very Kissy. You've got the guitarist and you've got the primary vocalist and songwriter, and then you've got Gene's eclectic mix of this and that, including the people that he's thrown into the mix. So they all have their places. They all have their roles. Mark, your final thoughts on all of this, and then why don't you tell us what the next year we'll consider down the road is going to be?
All right. Well, again, I mean, Kiss is obviously an important band to me too. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this podcast if they weren't, and I wouldn't have as many Kiss records in my collection if they weren't either. But again, when we talk about certain years, it's like, I guess you can make a sort of, snooty comparison. It's like wine. Some wines had better years than others. Some things aged better than others, right? But, there's some Kiss records that will never dwindle out of my top 5 ever. And there's some that will never make my top 5, and that's because we're lucky that we have so many great other albums and bands to listen to that we all love and talk about. And like you said, the great thing about these episodes is that we can talk about our love of these these other bands and stuff like that. I mean, I think sometimes people get this impression that we sit at home and we're just constantly spinning Kiss all the time. And if we don't listen to the studio records, we're listening to bootlegs. And if we're not listening to bootlegs, we're listening to some, odd, alternate mix album or something. But no, I mean, I listen to a lot of other things besides Kiss, and probably for the most part, more other things than Kiss for the most part, just because I get into moods for other things, So yeah, I mean, I think everybody's picks today were interesting, very well thought out. I think, obviously Ken had the most broadest selection with like Billy Joel and stuff like that as well in there. And probably me and Julian's probably had the more, I wouldn't say predictable, but more the kind of expected stuff that people would think.
Hard rock.
Like the hard rock and stuff like that.
And again, for having that really hard edge stuff, I'm not going to defend it. My listening on my iPhone this week was Pulse and Delicate Sound of Thunder, and on my Winamp on my computer is Angel. So, that's pretty far away from the picks that I've had today. But again, we're just talking about 1 year. It really distills it down to the core. I'm not going to shoehorn Kiss into my life. It's enough of a part of my life, but it doesn't have to be everything. I don't have to go, well, no, those are the top 5, but it may be for someone. Again, there's no right or wrong. We've wrapped the narrative around our Kiss experience today.
So before I give my year, I got to say though, it always makes me smile whenever you mention Winamp. That's such a flash from the past player for me too. Like when I hear that, I'm like, wow,
still works.
I'm impressed that you still use it. You know what I mean? Like
I freaking hate Apple Music. I have not found a player that just plays the music that I want, shows me the length of the playlist without having a high unnecessary bloated overhead. Coders today don't know how to refine their fucking product. They're lazy, so they just keep adding code and bloat. And Winamp really whips the llama's ass.
Yeah, that's the original tagline there. Wow. Okay, so for my year, I'm gonna maybe go a little bit later in the time frame here. I think I'm gonna pick 91.
You can't. There was no Kiss album in 91.
Oh, it has to be a Kiss. Okay, it has to be a Kiss.
Has to be a year. There's a Kiss album.
Unfortunately for the Kiss FAQ podcast, that's the one requirement. And while we've had our debate about live albums, Tokyo Tapes might have made my list had that been allowed.
Okay, so how
about try
80?
again.
80.
1980. Ooh.
Oh, okay. That's the year of Unmasked. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, God Gave Rock and Roll to You 2 was released in 1991, but it wasn't on a Kiss album until 1992. So that will have to wait. 1980 is going to be a tasty discussion down the road. Next week, hopefully Lonnie will be able to join us and to give us a update from the Indie Expo. See if anything interesting gets announced or leaked at the event, but it'll certainly be interesting to see how the event goes. And I hope for everyone's sake who's there, including those people who are organizers and vendors, that it's a very good weekend for you all. But that's it. 1978. What are your favorite albums? Do any of the Kiss solo albums or double platinum appear in your top 5 albums from that year, whether you were actively consuming those releases at the time or fell into them later? But for now, from Ken, Mark, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we shall see you next time. Thank you for spending time listening to the Kiss FAQ podcast today. All sales are final. There are no refunds. If you'd like, look us up on Facebook or come over to the message board and discuss the topics we've broadcast today. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you've listened to this show, and a like would very much be appreciated. We hope you'll join us again, but until then, remember, life's a radio. Turn it up to 10. I